When I snap my fingers in a moment through the magic of time travel, we are going back 3 millennia. We are going back to a little sliver of land 175 miles long and about 50 miles wide. And so when I snap my fingers, magically we will be there. And here we are. Across the thick, lush grass of the palace lawn fall the shadows of trees that have been transplanted from distant forests. Fish pools fed by artificial streams are perpetually ruffled with golden scales darting from water cave to water cave. Beautiful flowers in the royal garden spangled their rainbow colors everywhere. Deer stalk the parkways. Peacocks strut the walkways. Birds brought back from foreign aviaries flutter amidst the foliage around the palace. In the distance, I hear the neighing of 4,000 horses in the royal stable. They are standing, chewing their bits over troughs of gold, wearing blankets of Tyrian purple. In the distance is the royal garage, where there are housed 1,200 of his chariots, just waiting to be brought out when a visiting dignitary would come for the big parade. His palace would make the homes of the lifestyles of the rich and famous look like paupers' houses. In the royal cellar are thousands of flasks of the world's finest wines waiting to be uncorked at his weekly, wild, extravagant parties. His financial portfolio is no less impressive. Gold, $600 million. Silver, $1.2 billion. He is a shipping tycoon. His ships traverse the oceans, bringing back countless priceless treasures that adorn his palace walls. He is a builder. The building of the temple in Jerusalem, over a period of 7 years, employing 70,000 workers, 80,000 craftsmen, 3,300 master masons. He was one of the wisest men, in fact, the wisest man who ever lived. He was a true Renaissance man, a philosopher. As a philosopher, he had written proverbs, over 1,000 of them, over 3,000 of them, in fact. He was a musician. He had written 1,004 songs. He was an author and scientist, having written works on ichthyology, ornithology, and his favorite subject, botany. 700 of the world's most beautiful women called him husband. 300 more, his concubines, all 1,000, just awaiting his beck and call to fulfill his wildest sexual desire and his crazy, wildest sexual whim. He was Plato, Aristotle, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, and Hugh Hefner, all rolled into one person. Everywhere he went, he was followed by the paparazzi, more so than Elvis, Princess Diana, and Michael Jackson combined. He dined at only 5-star restaurants, shopped at only the finest bazaars. His mother was the beautiful and ravishing Bathsheba. His father was the great king of Israel, David. You know his name. His name is Solomon. Today is our lucky day because Solomon has promised to give us a preview of his latest and his last book. In fact, he has provided all of us a copy of his book today as we are awaiting him from the palace to come and give us this preview. You know it as the book of Ecclesiastes. You have a copy right there in front of you, thanks to the King Solomon. Now I see the palace doors beginning to open and the royal entourage making its way here to the front. I see the king, his gaunt form in his royal robes as he makes his way down. He looks much older to me than I remember him the last time that I saw him. We stand to our feet as the king approaches. His royal entourage as he walks up onto the platform and stands behind the podium. And then we are all seated on the edge of our seats and leaning forward to hear the words of the king. He pauses and overlooks all of us as we are seated there. Then he closes his eyes and he lifts his hands and his face toward heaven, and he cries out, Hevel Havalim, Hevel Havalim, Hakol Havel. Vanity of vanities, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What? Did I hear him correctly? Did I hear him say that everything is vanity? The man on whom the world exhausted itself, the man who had everything there was in the universe, he had all the money, he had all the women, he had all of the intellect, he had all of the power, and yet I hear him say that all of life is vanity. What in the world does Solomon mean? Here was a man who was living large, baby. That was his motto. And yet he has produced a book to describe for us, telling us that everything that you can acquire in this life under the sun, horizontally, without reference to God, 38 times in this book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon says it is all hevel. It is all vanity. Vanity. There's an interesting word. What in the world does it mean? There was one of those in my grandmother's bedroom when I was a child, and I never fully understood why she called it a vanity. Or is vanity something different? Maybe it's like what Carly Simon sang about in her song, You're So Vain. You walked into the party like you were walking up to a yacht. Your hat strategically dipped below one eye. Your scarpet was apricot. You had one eye on the mirror as you watched yourself gavotte, and all the girls dreamed that they'd be your partner, and you're so vain. So Carly Simon sang about, they say, Warren Beatty. You're so vain. Is that the kind of vanity that Solomon is talking about? Well, that's a part of it. But the Hebrew word vanity, hevel, that occurs 38 times in this book, 38 times like relentless salvos of pessimism. Vanity, 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 vanity. Your looks are vanity, your car is vanity, your bank account is vanity, your house is vanity, your health is vanity. Everything you are and everything you possess under the sun is vanity. What in the world does Solomon mean when he cries out, vanity of vanities, all is vanity? Notice the emphasis there in verse 2 of Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Notice the intensity of it. It's not just vanity, but it's vanity repeated. In fact, it's doubled in the Hebrew, which is the Hebrew way of bolding something, underlining it, making it 20-point type instead of 12-point type, and putting 3 exclamation marks behind it. Vanity of vanities. Everything in life, Solomon says, is super vanity. There's the intensity of it. There's the universality of it. Nothing is left out. Everything you are and everything you have ultimately is vanity. You came into this world with nothing. You're going out of this world with nothing. It doesn't matter how much money you have or don't have, whether you have looks or no looks, whether you're the king or whether you're a pauper. Vanity is the end of it all, the end of the road. The word vanity, hevel, in Hebrew is a very interesting term. It is a word that basically means breath. It's a word that describes vapor, breath. It's that which is transient. It's that which doesn't last. It's a puff of wind. It's a whiff of smoke. It's what's left after you pop a soap bubble. Vanity. The word describes emptiness. The word describes that which is transient, that which is fleeting, that which is passive. In order to understand the book of Ecclesiastes, you must understand the meaning and usage of this word, hevel, in Hebrew, vanity, as it is used 38 times in these 12 chapters. There are 5 basic aspects or nuances of this word. Let's drill down a little bit to make sure we understand what the wisest man who ever lived has to say about the meaning and purpose of life. If you had an opportunity to go to a meeting where King Solomon was going to speak for 40 minutes, would it be worth your time to listen to the wisest man short of Jesus who ever lived? It would be indeed worth your time. And I hope you will listen carefully. As the wisest man who ever lived said, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. The word first describes that which is transient, it's fleeting, it's passing, it's not here to stay. It's yours now, but it will not be yours forever if you possess it. It's a word that describes the absurdity of life. It's a word that arises from the contradiction that we experience in life of 2 undeniable realities. In life, we have wolves, and we also have lambs. In life, we have weeds, but we also have roses. We have sharks, but we also have kittens. We have tornadoes, but we have gentle breezes. We have ugliness, but we also have beauty. We have life, but we also have death. It's these things in life that all of us experience, that there's a certain absurdity, there's no ultimate consistency to the way things go. That's the Hebrew word hevel, translated vanity. Number 3, the word describes that which is the irony of life. Some things are inequitable and they just don't make any sense. The evil prospers and the good guy dies young. That's the irony of life Solomon talks about. The cheater in school gets the high grades. But the one who does not cheat, who plods along, he or she makes the B-. The embezzler gets the Lamborghini. But the honest worker may, 1 year before retirement, so that the company doesn't have to pay full retirement and doesn't want to pay all of your salary, they'll let you go so they can hire someone 30 years younger at much less pay. That's the irony of it all. Action does not yield the expected results. It's the irony of it all. You don't get that job because of your skin color. Or you get that job because of your skin color. It is the absurdity and the irony that we find in life. Hevel, vanity. And then the word describes that which is incomprehensible, the limitations of human reason to figure out and penetrate the murk of life. You can't figure it out. It's incomprehensible. You cannot gain it. You cannot control it. You can't keep it. God has put enough rationality in the universe to make faith reasonable, but He has left enough rationality out to make faith absolutely essential. The one thing about Ecclesiastes that Solomon teaches is you are never under the sun, horizontally, without God, you're never going to be able to figure it out. You're never going to be able to make sense of it. The 3-year-old child involved in the car accident on Friday night that is now brain dead because of that accident, because someone else made serious mistakes. Or the 41-year-old Kobe Bryant, who is world-renowned, and yet he famous, and 8 others with him who were just like us, normal folks, not famous, but all 9 died on a hillside in California one foggy morning just a few weeks ago. How in the world does that come together? How can we put together the incomprehensibility of life? And then the word hevel, vanity, describes the futility of it all. Life is futile in one sense, according to Solomon. You will die. The people who bury you will die. And the shovel used to bury you will turn to dust. It doesn't matter whether you're Mother Teresa or Osama bin Laden. You're going to the same place. It's called a grave. So one day we're going to die. One day I'm going to die. And so I'm going to die, and maybe I'll die here at some point, and you'll have my funeral. And you'll come together at my funeral, and they'll bury me, and then you'll go to the house, and all the people, will be there, or maybe we'll have a fellowship after the services here at the church, and you'll talk about, well, we're grateful that Dr. Allen was our interim pastor for a while, and he worked hard over there at Southwestern, and he's married to Kate. And then somebody will look at their watch and say, oh, I've got an appointment at the hair salon. And somebody else will say, how about them Cowboys? And I wonder what they're going to do next year. And you'll sit there and you'll eat potato salad. And shortly thereafter, I will be forgotten. And so will you. And so is everyone who goes the way of hevel, vanity, futility. And then the word describes the randomness of it all. There's no rhyme or reason to what happens. You can't figure it out. But don't make the mistake of thinking that it's all meaninglessness, because it's not. Solomon's book begins with that repetition 5 times of the word vanity. Vanity of vanities, vanity of vanities. All is vanity. It's like the book begins like fingernails being dragged down a blackboard. Solomon should have been put on antidepressants. He needed it. He has a serious case of the blues. He's like a New Orleans blues man on the mud-slung docks of the Mississippi. Said, I searched for wisdom, but the girl done turned up wrong. Said, I searched for wisdom, but the girl done turned up wrong. Gave me mighty fearful contusions, make me toss all night long. Can you hear Solomon the blues man as he sings? Life is supposed to be a symphony, and instead it is a cacophony. It becomes dull, it becomes depressing, it becomes discouraging, and it can become a disappointment and even a disaster. As the great Solomon is giving us an overview of his book, do you see him this morning? Look carefully as his robe opens occasionally, and there, tattooed on his arm, tattooed right there on his forearm, is the Hebrew word hevel, vanity. That is his motto. It's the disappointment of the pursuit of life, and then the dissatisfaction in the enjoyment when you find it. When the Cowboys won the Super Bowl in 1972, the most valuable player was Dwayne Thomas. He was interviewed by the most famous sportscaster of that day, and he was asked this question: what does it feel like to play in the ultimate game? And I'll never forget Dwayne Thomas's answer. He said, if it's the ultimate game, why is it played again next year? Vanity of vanities. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What Solomon does in the book of Ecclesiastes is he gives you a running commentary of everything he tried in life to find meaning and purpose. And it's the same kind of stuff that people everywhere are trying in order to find meaning and purpose. There are at least 5 things that Solomon tried, experimented with, gave himself to, immersed himself in order to find meaning and purpose in life. He tells us about these at the end of chapter 1 and all through chapter 2. The first is wisdom. Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived. It was the gift God gave him that Solomon, as a young man, asked God for. And God gave him wisdom, and he amassed wisdom and knowledge. But Solomon discovered that intellectualism and knowledge, apart from the wisdom of God, is a dead end. And so he said in verse 16 of chapter 1, I said to myself, see, I have amassed wisdom far beyond all those who were over Jerusalem before me. My mind has thoroughly grasped wisdom and knowledge. I applied my mind to know wisdom and knowledge, but the result, madness and folly. I learned that this too is a pursuit of the wind. For with much wisdom is much sorrow, and as knowledge increases, grief increases. Solomon discovered that all of the knowledge in the world will never bring you happiness. I spend my time around PhDs and those in search of a PhD. And one of the things I've discovered as time has gone by is that the more education people get, oftentimes the more ignorant they become. There's nothing quite like education. It makes people think they know things when they really don't. And at the end of Wisdom Road, there's a sign that says dead end. Education is not everything. Education's wonderful. I'm not knocking it. I'm not saying you should go around being ignorant, you know. One of my favorite characters of church history is the great John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. And one day, Wesley, by the way, had an Oxford PhD. One day a woman came to him and said, Mr. Wesley, God does not need your Oxford education. To which John Wesley replied, nor, madam, does he need your ignorance. And so we're not knocking education here, but we're just saying that education alone will never bring meaning and purpose in life. An uneducated man can steal a watermelon off of a boxcar on a train, but the educated man will steal the railroad. Education does not change character. And in fact, Solomon says what I find at the end of Education Road in verse 18 is, with much wisdom comes much sorrow, and the more you know, the more grief you have. So Solomon couldn't find meaning and purpose in life in his education and wisdom. So he decided to try wine. And oh, did he try wine. And so in chapter 2, he says in verse 1, I said to myself, go ahead, test me with pleasure, enjoy what is good, but it turned out to be futile. I said about laughter, it's madness. About pleasure, what does this accomplish? Look at verse 3. Teenagers, I want you to look carefully at verse 3. I explored with my mind the pull of wine on my body and how to grasp folly until I could see what is good for people to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. Solomon is like many people today. He said, if I can drink this, smoke that, snort this, shoot that, then somehow I'm going to find happiness and I'll be able to beat the doldrums and the disappointments of life. And so Solomon sought it all in wine. Have you discovered that our culture today is awash in alcoholism? They can't sell anything on television anymore, including a tube of toothpaste, without a naked woman there. Our country is awash in sex. In 2014, the 50th anniversary of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition made its debut. The swimsuit edition was created in 1964 to fill the winter months, typically a slower time on the sports calendar. Beginning in 1997, the swimsuit edition had no athletes. It had only models in swimsuits. Since then, it's become the largest revenue producer. Forbes estimates that it's generated more than $1 billion. The swimsuit issue traditionally sells more than 1 million copies on newsstands, 10 to 15 times more than any regular issue of Sports Illustrated. It accounts for 11% of Sports Illustrated total income, the swimsuit edition. Subscribers, because of its risque nature, have the option of not receiving the swimsuit edition and getting an extension on their subscription. Less than 1% of men do so. We are a culture that is awash in wine, in women, in sex, in hedonism. Solomon felt like he would find all that he was looking for in wine. He couldn't do it. He said, well, then I'll try women. I'll try sex. 700 wives, 300 concubines, that's a lot of sex. And yet in the midst of all of that, he could not find what he was looking for. He talked about it in verses 8 and 10. He said, I gathered many concubines and set my mind to pleasure all of the women of the world. But he even found there that there was no joy in Mudville for Solomon. Then he sought work. He said, I'll become a workaholic. So in chapter 2, verses 4 through 7, he writes, I increased my achievements. I built houses, planted vineyards, made gardens, parks for myself, planted every kind of fruit tree, constructed reservoirs from which to irrigate flourishing trees, and so on and so forth, livestock, large herds, flocks, more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. I amassed silver and gold for myself, and the treasure of kings and provinces. Solomon said, I'm going to become a workaholic. So like some of you, he just threw himself into his work. And he decided, if I can just throw myself into my work and become a workaholic, then I'll find meaning and purpose in life. But you know what he discovered? That everything he built up, he said, you die and you have to leave to heirs who are stupid and who don't know how to handle it. And who blow it. That's what Solomon says in the rest of this book. He tried work. So he tried wisdom, wine, women, work, and finally he tried wealth. He amassed all of the money he could possibly amass. He thought, if I can find happiness through money, like so many of you today, if I can just make more, somehow money's going to bring happiness. No, money can't bring happiness. It doesn't bring happiness. It never can, and it never will. Solomon said, I sought all of these things. His financial portfolio. He was the top guy on Wall Street. And yet, he found no meaning and no purpose in all of that wealth. Wisdom, wine, work, wealth, women, pleasure. And yet, at the end of it all, Solomon said 38 times in this book, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Hear me, listen, listen. If Solomon, with all of that, can't find happiness, you and I will never have a tenth of that, and yet you're pursuing that, you're never going to find happiness either. No joy, no peace, no meaning in your life, no real happiness, no true success. You're not going to find it under the sun. Solomon sailed the high seas of human experience, and he made many charts and maps. He also took along with him his digital camera. And he took a lot of photographs along the way of himself. He took a ton of selfies. And that's what Ecclesiastes is all about. It's a book of selfies. And so here's Solomon the gourmand, click. Here's Solomon the philosopher, click. Here's Solomon the playboy, click. Here's Solomon the professor, click. Here's Solomon the businessman, click. And over and over and over, Solomon discovers the world promises more than it delivers. The title page is a whole lot more interesting than the actual book itself. And the more Solomon was gratified, the less he was satisfied. Hevel Havalim, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Therefore, Solomon concluded in chapter 2, verse 17. Look at it. Chapter 2, verse 17. Therefore, I hated life. You ever get to where you hate life? Therefore, I hated life because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me, for everything is vanity, everything is futile, and it's a chasing after the wind. It's a chasing after the wind. Solomon was like so many of us. If I can just do it, experience it, buy it, learn it, or go there, somehow I'm going to find peace and meaning and purpose and happiness in life. But you have not, you cannot, and you will not find meaning in any of these things under the sun. You're like a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat that isn't there. That's what life will be like for all of us who search for meaning and purpose in life, as Solomon says, under the sun, horizontally, without reference to God. We search, and our search is expressed in many ways in our culture. Let me enumerate some of them for you. We see the vanity of it all in literature. So Chesterton says in his work, George Bernard Shaw, all is vanity, life is dust, and love is ashes. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist philosopher, we are bubbles of nothingness on a sea of emptiness. Mark Twain, man lives in a world where he's honored for an hour, then he is forgotten forever. Thomas Gray, our hearts are muffled drums beating funeral dirges to the grave. Vanity, 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 and vanity. You see it in literature. You see it in music. Elvis Costello, nonsense prevails, modesty fails, grace and virtue turn into stupidity. What shall we do with all this useless beauty? Maybe you'd rather hear it from Bob Dylan in Idiot Wind. Now everything's a little upside down. As a matter of fact, the wheels have stopped. What's good is bad. What's bad is good. You'll find out when you reach the top, you're on the bottom. Or maybe you would prefer Metallica in their song Fade to Black. Life, it seems, will fade away, drifting further every day, getting lost within myself. Nothing matters, no one else. I've lost the will to live, simply nothing more to give. There's nothing more for me. I need the end to set me free. Maybe you want to hear it from Courtney Love's band in the song Use Once and Destroy. It's the emptiness that follows you down. It's the ache inside when it all burns out. Or maybe you too, and Bono is more to your taste. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Or maybe you want to listen to Lady Gaga as she sings her song, Vanity. Midnight at the Glamour Show on a Sunday night. Everybody drink a lot of whiskey and wine. We dance like no tomorrow. We're on burlesque time, but everybody's got to work tomorrow at 9. Vanity. Pictures in magazines and movie screens. Vanity. Mirrors and cameras. So many beauty queens. Vanity. It's so good to be fabulous and glamorous. We love ourselves and no one else. Vanity. Or maybe you would rather hear it from the rapper Wale. Here's what Wale says in his Vanity lyrics. I promise it comes with the guilt. How awesome is this narcissism? You save your hard earnings to pay for these opinions. Now look at me, how much vanity do you see? Look at me, how much vanity do you see? All around me are familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces, bright and early for the daily races. Going nowhere. Went to school, and I was very nervous. No one knew me. Hello, teacher, tell me what's my lesson. Look right through me. Now look at me, how much vanity do you see? Now look at me, how much vanity do you see? Or maybe you'd rather hear it from Christina Aguilar's song, Vanity. And I'll just have to edit this one just like Lady Gaga's, because the filth in the lyrics of this song that your teenage girls are listening to is utterly atrocious. So here's a short edited version. I'm not cocky, I just love myself. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Never mind, I am. Yeah, I am. If I were her, I would kiss me. Every day I see myself, I love me even more. It's me I adore. I'm the best for sure. V is for vanity. Every time I look at me, I turn myself on. Yeah, I turn myself on. V is for vanity. Thank you, Mom and Daddy, because I turn myself on. Yeah, I turn myself on. Let us not forget who owns the throne. And then at the end of that song, at the time, her little 5-year-old son, Max, on the recording, when she asked the question, who owns the throne? Her little 5-year-old boy on the recording, Max, says, you do, Mommy. No, Christina, I got news for you, girl. You don't own the throne. He does. You don't sit on the throne, Christina. He does. Vanity of vanities, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And then not only do we see it in the music industry, but we see it in the advertising industry. So, Calvin Klein. Those of you in my generation, when we were younger, the baby boomers, when we were younger, he sold us obsession. And as we got older, he changed the cologne and the perfume, and then he sold us eternity. And now, more recently, to our children and our grandchildren, he is selling escape. And then, now to the youngest generation in the postmodern world in which we live, the new fragrance is contradiction. You remember the MasterCard motto and commercials that used to run incessantly years ago? There are some things money cannot buy. For everything else, there's MasterCard. But the most egregious advertisement, in my opinion, of them all was about 15 years ago when it came on the television screen. These words, Volvo, our most impressive safety innovation yet, a Volvo that can save your soul. Vanity of vanities, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. Well, is that where it is? Actually, no. Because when you go to the last paragraph of the book in chapter 12, Solomon begins where he, or ends where he began, but with a different twist. So in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 8, he concludes everything in this book called A House of Mirrors with the same words he began in verse 8. Same words of chapter 1 verse 2 are repeated in chapter 12 verse 8. Vanity of vanities, everything is vanity. Look at that. All is vanity. Everything in life under the sun apart from God. Try to find meaning and purpose. It's a dead-end street. You can't do it. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. But then Solomon unwinds in a final chapter. And in this final chapter, in this final paragraph, we come down to the last two verses in chapter 12. And in the last two verses of chapter 12, Solomon gives us the solution and the answer. The book Solomon tried all kinds of things, including materialism and all of the isms there are. But the one thing that Solomon never went to was atheism. He never became an atheist. And here's why in verses 13 and 14. When all has been heard, The conclusion of the matter is this: fear God and keep His commandments, because this is for all humanity. For God will bring every act to judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil. Now you better pay attention these last 5 minutes. Students, you better pay careful and close attention these last 5 minutes to the wisest man who ever lived. Senior adults, you've got all that experience packed away. You're in the last quarter of the game. But you better listen to what the wisest man who ever lived said in the two imperatives in verses 13 and 14. When all has been heard, when everything has been heard, here is the conclusion of the matter. Mic drop. Mic drop right here. Fear God and do what He says. Fear God and do what He says. That is the secret to it all. Fear God and do what He says. Fear God, keep His commandments. And then come the motives for this. You better fear God and you better keep His commandments, for this concerns every person, Solomon says. This is the most important thing in your life. Hear me, whether you're young or old. You better listen. The most important thing in life and the motive for fearing God and doing what He says, you better do this because this concerns every person. It's the most important thing in your life. And the second motive is in that last verse. God will bring every deed to judgment, visible or hidden, good or evil. You're going to give an account to God for everything you've done. You think nobody knows what you said and did, but God does. You think you've gotten away with it, but God says you haven't. And God says what you better do, if you're wise, you're going to fear Him and you're going to do what He says, because you're going to have to stand before Him and give an account. Fear God and keep His commandments. That's human action. God will bring everything into judgment. That's divine action. Notice there's the certainty of it. God will bring everything into judgment. It is certain. It is clear. It is certain. As sure as I'm standing here today, and you are seated here listening to me today, you are going to have to give an account. I am going to have to give an account to God for everything that we have done. God will bring every deed into judgment. The certainty of it. The comprehensiveness of it. Every deed. Good or bad. Look at it. Solomon says, whether good or whether bad, it's all coming. The comprehensibility, the comprehensiveness of it. Literally, the Hebrew reads, God you shall fear. There's an inward devotion in fearing God, and then there's an external worship of fearing God. You better have the inner and the external. Fearing God is the point of departure. Keeping His commandments, that's the path you travel. Point of departure, you fear God. The book of Proverbs, Solomon talks about the fear of God. That's the beginning of wisdom. There's where it all starts. The fear of God is the very beginning of wisdom. That's where it begins. Fear God, and then the path you travel, you keep His commandments. By the way, Deuteronomy 5:29 says fearing God is keeping His commandments. What does the Lord require of you? That you fear God by walking in all of His ways, by keeping His commandments. Deuteronomy 28, verse 9. Fear God in obedience to His commands, dispel the mist of vanity. There's where all the meaninglessness goes. It goes out the window. For this is the whole duty of man. It is final in its scope. It is universal in its application. Life under the sun apart from God is fragmented. It'll never make sense. It never comes to the whole. But life under the sun, S-O-N. Life lived vertically, fearing God and doing what He says. This is what Solomon says is the way to move forward. It mitigates the pessimism of this book, hallows the contents of this book. The book's dim obscurity can only be illumined by the light of these last two verses. Solomon took the ashes of his life and he made ink and he wrote his autobiography. If you believe that age will fulfill the promises of youth and that today's deficiencies will be supplied by tomorrow's fullness, you better listen to Ecclesiastes. Because apart from God, It will not happen. Ecclesiastes is a series of question marks, but finally ends in the last two verses with God's exclamation point. When it's all, end of it all, when everything has been heard, here's the mic drop. Fear God and do what He says. God will bring everything into judgment. Not only nations, but individuals. Not open actions only, but secret actions. Not actions only, but thoughts. Not good works only, but evil. All of these things will God bring. Good and evil is the Hebrew idiom in verses 13 and 14. For the totality of everything, God will bring absolutely everything, absolutely all, absolutely every person into His judgment. And on that day, there will be no opportunity for you to be a no-show. That's why now you're living it up, having fun, thinking about being unfaithful to your wife or your husband, huh? You're thinking about, you have the opportunity, maybe you can just take a little bit of money out of that account from work. Nobody will notice. You have the opportunity to do so. You're thinking about ratting that person out. You're thinking about lying on that resume. All of these things. One day you'll stand before God and give an account for every bit of it with no opportunity to be a no-show. Ecclesiastes deals with the monotony of life. We face the appalling inference first that nothing in life matters, and then Solomon comes to the conclusion and he says, no, actually everything matters. Everything matters. We live in an American culture that says this. Listen. The American culture in which we live today says this: everything goes, nothing matters. Everything goes, nothing matters. God says everything doesn't go and everything matters, and you're going to have to stand and give an account to Him. You know, it kills complacency in life to know that nothing goes unnoticed and unassessed by God that you do. Hey, if God cares this much, nothing in life can be pointless. For Jesus, no detail of your life is unimportant. Nothing in earth is too small. There's no idle word, but He doesn't know. The death of a sparrow, He takes note of. The cup of cold water you give, He takes note of. Everything matters. Every little thing as well as every big thing. It all matters to God. He who follows Solomon in his quest for the reality of life will find it in the service of Him who said, I am come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. Jesus, John 10:10. If you put New Testament glasses on, you discover that the worker and the work both matter to God, and God's proven that to you by sending His Son Jesus to die on the cross for our sins and make it possible to overcome the futility, the emptiness, the vanity of life. You ever play spades or rook? I used to play a lot of spades, especially when I was a student pastor. I was the king of spades in those days. You ever play spades? The trumps are all in God's hand. Don't you think for 1 minute that you're going to outsmart God. That you're somehow going to finagle and beat God. Nope. Nope. You're never going to do that. Jorge Bernardo said, in order to be prepared to hope in what does not deceive, we must first lose hope in everything that deceives. This is the problem with so many Christians today. We're putting all our eggs in the basket, all of our hopes in stuff in the world that deceives. And we've got to quit doing that and put all of our hope. We've got to first lose hope in everything that deceives so that we can have hope in He who does not deceive. You can't serve God and mammon, Jesus said. All that thrills my soul is Jesus. He is more than life to me. So the song says. So you put New Testament glasses on in Ecclesiastes 12 and the last 2 verses. Fear God and do what He says. Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. It's the same thing. We sang about it earlier this morning. Don't just say you love God, put it into practice. Let's see it. Let's see it lived out. Fear God, students, and do what He says. This is the whole duty of man. Billy Barnes wrote it and sang it, and many others have sung it. The song, Have I Stayed Too Long at the Fair? What we've been doing today is a visit to Vanity Fair. That's what Ecclesiastes is. It is a visit to Vanity Fair. And so Billy Barnes wrote the song back in the 1950s, Have I Stayed Too Long at the Fair? I wanted the music to play on forever. Have I stayed too long at the fair? I wanted the clown to be constantly clever. Have I stayed too long at the fair? I bought me blue ribbons to tie up my hair, but I couldn't find anybody to care. The merry-go-round is beginning to taunt now. Have I stayed too long at the fair? The music has stopped and the children must go now. Have I stayed too long at the fair? Oh, Mother dear, I know you're very proud. Your little girl in gingham is so far above the crowd. No, Daddy dear, you never could have known that I would be so successful and yet so very much alone. I wanted to live in a carnival city with laughter and love everywhere. I wanted my friends to be thrilling and witty. I wanted somebody to care. I found my blue ribbons all shiny and new, but now I discover them no longer blue. The merry-go-round is beginning to taunt me. Have I stayed too long at the fair? There's nothing to win, and there's no one to want me. Have I stayed too long at the fair? Ladies and gentlemen, do not stay too long at the fair.